Welcome to the Business of Story, where we connect you with the leading minds in the art of business storytelling. Learn from best-selling authors, Hollywood screenwriters, makers, content marketers, and brand raconteurs on how to craft and tell compelling stories that sell. The Business of Story is brought to you by Oracle Marketing Cloud, helping businesses use the latest marketing technologies to tell their stories and connect with their customers. Emmy, which provides innovative email marketing tools and services that drive brilliant results. And by Convince and Convert, digital marketing advisors and counselors to leading brands and organizations worldwide. Convince and Convert helps you gain and keep your customers online. Here's your host, Park Howell.
You know, most business leaders have important brand stories to tell, but few are actually being heard. Now, we have a proven system to help you develop business stories to grow your enterprise and your people. It's called the story cycle. It's a 10-step process that uses the same techniques that Hollywood uses to create blockbusters, but in this case, it's an epic story for your brand, your business, and your people. And you can learn more about it at businessofstory.com. In fact, the story cycle was a genesis for this podcast. So welcome today to the Business of Story, where we explore, among other things, the craft of developing brand stories that truly move people to action. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I'm tickled that you're here with me today. We have another amazing story artist with us, an Oscar-winning, Emmy-toting visual effects artist whose work you've seen in everything from, well, the Dick Tracy movie, Cotton Club, and FX to Battlestar Galactica and the Star Trek movies and series. He even designed the Starship Enterprise NX-01, for you Trekkies out there, which is featured weekly on the television series Enterprise, starring Scott Bakula. His name is Doug Drexler, and Doug is with us today. Now, we cover a lot of ground with Doug in today's show. You know, we start and talk about the fact that every child has a natural sense of composition, that art of drawing. But where does it go as we age, and how can we get it back to become better visual storytellers? We also talk about the difference between seeing and looking, and how we can become better visual storytellers when we know the difference. Also, do your visuals pass the squint test? And the importance of having an utter air of confidence in all that you do, especially in your storytelling. But before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to some folks who I think are superstars. Why? Well, because they were kind enough to hit the iTunes and give this show a rating. That's right, I just said hit the iTunes. They hit iTunes to give this show a rating. I'd like to thank, first and foremost, D. Scrivo, who wrote under the heading of Exuberant Bliss. This podcast is fantastic, useful, strategic, actionable content. I'm able to serve my customers at mindfizzle.com by helping them make a decision via story communication. The podcast is a must listen. Thank you, D. Scrivo. I truly appreciate it. Also, I'd like to say thanks to Green Deb, who tunes in from Dubai, and said in part, Park really convinced me that the power of story can be used even in a very numbers and data-driven industry as IT. Keep up the good work, Green Deb. Keep turning that data into drama so you can connect with people and, of course, move them to action. And one more shout-out goes to Roy Boy Prods, who writes, "The Business of Story not only has great advice from people in various situations on storytelling, but their stories are also entertaining." Thank you, Roy Boy Prods. Keep up the good work out there. Now, I'd like to thank all of you who have taken the time to rate the Business of Story podcast and share your feelings about the program. This helps our distribution immensely so that we can reach more people and help them with their stories. Now, if you haven't rated and reviewed us on iTunes, I hope you'll take a moment to do so. Much time and effort goes into bringing you these amazing guests, and I appreciate your help in sharing this podcast with your world. Thank you for that. Now, one last shout out goes to John Lim in Washington, D.C. John has an incredible podcast called Moving Forward that chronicles the trials and tribulations of entrepreneurs. You know, I was lucky enough to be a guest on John's show just a couple weeks back. John has also been an amazing source of guests for Business of Story, including today's guest. So I can't thank you enough, John. I really count you among my great online friends, and I can't wait to find a time when we actually get to meet in person. So let's dial in Hollywood and beam up and Oscar-winning, Emmy-winning visual effects artist, Doug Drexler.
Hey, Doug, welcome to Business of Story.
Hey, Park, how goes it?
Oh, it's great, man. I appreciate you being here. You are being added to an illustrious list of story artists that we've been recording from around the world on Business of Story, but you are a first.
Do you usually have illustrious? Because are you sure you want me then?
Of course. You're our first in a couple of reasons. You're the first Academy Award winner story artist with us, and you're the first visual story artist with us.
That's interesting.
So I know you've gained great acclaim for your makeup artistry, and now you're doing a lot of things in motion graphics work and whatever. And when we were speaking last week,
every face is a story, man.
Isn't that the truth?
You know, I mean, when I started in the makeup business, we were living in New York City. And, you know, you come out to LA and there's different kinds of faces, but they tend to be kind of a homogenous, like the subways in New York City, it's like a Fort Knox of faces. And each face, you know, it's like that old TV show, The Naked City. There are 8 million stories in The Naked City, and you're wearing them all on your face.
Well, everyone walking around L.A. is an artist of some sort or other trying to make it big, aren't they? From musicians to actors to directors to...
Well, there's a lot of that there, but, you know, New York City is really a high-energy creative center as well.
Yeah.
But is there as much show business? I mean, New York has a lot of, filming and shooting going on there all the time.
Absolutely.
In L.A., actually less and less all the time.
You won your Oscar for your work on the amazing Dick Tracy movie, correct?
Right.
And how did that all come about? How did you get into makeup artistry?
Well, you know, unlike most people who are makeup artists, I didn't really grow up wanting to be a makeup artist. I mean, I like the old monster movies, and of course I was a kid in the 60s, so, you know, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Larry Talbot, you know, all the Universal monsters, all that type of stuff, which I loved, of course. But honestly, I never thought of myself making monsters. I was always kind of a hardware science fiction guy. But I always I was always fascinated by it. And so if there were articles in magazines, I would collect those articles and file them away. It's so convenient now with the internet. I mean, I could type in anything and get 10,000. Anyone who wants to get somewhere today, wow, you've got it made. It's so incredible to be able to type in something and everything comes up. You know, it's like Star Trek, where Spock could go to the computer and literally with his voice ask the computer for something, and the computer would give him a bunch of stuff. And I remember growing up and looking at that and thinking, that's kind of far-fetched, but I think we'll have something like that. And sure enough, well, anyway, I digress. I collected, you know, all kinds of articles on visual effects and makeup and anything behind the scenes. I loved that stuff. And I was working in an architectural supply, and I was spending most of my time learning to draw. You know, I went to the Art Students League and stuff like that. But I was working at this architectural supply called Charette, and they had a Halloween party. And I remembered that I had this article on how to make molds and sculpt makeup and run foam latex and all that. And I said, this is perfect. So I dragged the article out, and I'd never done any of it before. I'd never made molds. I never sculpted. I never did live casting, and just decided I'm going to do it. I've got 2 weeks. And I just found out that I had a flair for it, and I had so much fun. It was incredible fun. It's like creating a new life form. You know, when a makeup goes on to someone, it's very magical. Not only does it blow your mind to see this creature or whatever it is, or old age or Planet of the Apes makeup, but there's a psychological effect on you and on the person wearing the makeup. When they look in the mirror and they see somebody or something else, there's a change that happens in their head. So, a switch flips. It's the most amazing thing. So anyway, my first makeup was for a Halloween party, and I did a Planet of the Apes makeup, and that was it, man. I mean, I was just off and running, and I couldn't stop. I just loved doing it so much. I mean, even making molds. I used loved making molds, every bit of it. I didn't know I could sculpt. Yeah, I had been sketching for a while, so it's like, I guess it's like anything else. One thing informs the other, you know. And sketching is, if you could sculpt, you probably could sketch, and vice versa.
Now, how did you break into the movie business?
Well, you know, I started doing the makeup for fun, and I visited a friend of mine, who I still know to this day, Doug Murray. He wrote articles for behind-the-scenes magazines, you know, about how, like American Cinematographer or, you know, makeup effects magazines or stuff like that. And I knew him from somewhere else, and I knew he had an incredible collection of stuff, behind-the-scenes stuff, and I went to his house one day to see it, and I brought along pictures of what I was doing, and he said, you know what, I just did an interview with Dick Smith. Now, Dick Smith is like, anybody will tell you, is the greatest makeup artist who ever lived. There's a lot of great ones, but and most people know of Rick Baker, but if you were to ask Rick Baker, who's the greatest makeup artist who ever lived, he'll tell you Dick Smith. So anyway, Doug Murray says, I just interviewed Dick Smith. I'm going to give you his telephone number. You should call him. And I'm like, oh, you're kidding me. And it was like, you know, he hands me the number. It's like, oh.
It's who you know, isn't it?
You know? So, but I was scared because since I had gotten into makeup, I was reading up on everyone, and I bought every conceivable book I could find on the subject, and I knew who Dick Smith was. And I think it took me a couple of weeks to build up the courage to actually call him on the phone, which I did. And he kept me on the phone for an hour, giving me information and addresses on where to get stuff, and you know, and he was just the greatest guy. And actually, he was well known for that, helping people. He never held back. And I started sending him pictures of my stuff, and 3 months later, he asked me if I could come to work on a picture that he was working on called The Hunger. It was David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve, and it was just like nouveau vampire, contemporary vampire story. The director was Tony Scott, who directed, you know, like Top Gun, and his brother's Ridley Scott did Alien and Blade Runner and stuff like that. So I was on that for 6 months, and if you've ever seen the movie, it's a textbook of makeup. I mean, there's like 5 or 6 stages of old age where David Bowie grows old within an hour, There were full body suits, mummy suits, change-o heads, which are really puppet heads, you know. Just anything you could imagine was on that job. So it was like my education, my makeup education. And I hit it off with Dick Smith. We became great friends, and that was the beginning of me working in the business, which I guess now is like 33 years.
And how many movies did you do leading up to Dick Tracy?
Oh, God, I don't know. I've never.
Or what are some of them? We've probably seen a lot of your work out there, I'd imagine.
Well, maybe. Let me think. Manhunter, which was Michael Mann. Boy, I have to think of the movies I worked on. You know, I don't usually think about this kind of thing. One thing I was on, most people.
Well, Wikipedia tells me the Cotton Club, FX, Manhunter,
oh, thank
Lady.
Thank you. Don't forget Chud. Don't forget Chud. You know, Chud was one of those movies I worked on that I was so embarrassed. And then as years have gone by, when people hear I worked on Chud, they get all excited, you know, like I worked on some masterpiece or something, you know. People, it all depends on how old you are. There's a certain age, magic age between the age of like 11 and 16.
Yeah.
Where if something hits you really hard then, that's just it for the rest of your life.
So how did you arrive at the look for Dick Tracy?
Well, I mean, the look was well established. We knew that we were going to be true to Chester Gould's vision of what he did. I was a big Dick Tracy fan. I loved Chester Gould. And it really was incredible stuff. I mean, if you were to look back and read, one story took 1 year's worth of panels to do.
And Chester was the creator of Dick Tracy, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, he did Dick Tracy for like 50 years. And So I knew all about him. I read him as a kid. I knew what made, Chester Gould, and not everybody recognizes that. I think that my partner and I, John Caglione, I have to say we did a good job.
Well, Oscar-worthy good job, I guess.
Well, the thing was that, to me, the measure is how much does it, evoke that feeling of what Chester Gould did. And I remember that Jean Gould, Chester Gould's daughter, I guess she was in her 70s.
Mm-hmm.
She may have been in her late 60s, early 70s. She came to the set. And when she walked in the makeup trailer, she gasped. And she called to Flat Top like he should know her. And that was like an amazing moment for us. There are plenty of, movies and TV shows where they will take something that's well established, and whoever is producing and directing it just feels like they got to put their stank on it. You know what I mean? I've got to take this and fix it, or make it what it could have been, or update it.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's. I'm not going to say I hate that, because it's been done well from time to time, but usually there's a certain amount of. It's disrespectful. In a way, you're showing that you don't really appreciate what the original was all about. That whole idea of fixing something just pisses me off. Anyway, don't let me run off there.
So what, you got to take us through it. You're sitting in the audience. What does it feel like to be propped up, ready to go? You don't know if you're going to win this thing or not. They call your name out, and you walk up on that stage to collect your Oscar.
Well, as you can imagine, it is rather surreal. You grow up seeing the Oscars every year, and you know that like how many millions and millions of people are watching around the world. And to actually be there is really crazy, but it's no more crazy than having spent the last couple of years with all those actors who were on the show. That really was a who's who of Hollywood. Every big actor wanted to be on that. Warren cashed in all kinds of favors with the actors. I think they all work for scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that they all work for scale on that, just because, it was all amongst friends, But, reality kind of shrinks when you hear your name. It wasn't a big surprise. We thought we were going to get it, because there was no job that the scope, nothing could compare, What were we against? Like Cyrano de Bergerac? A nose, it was really great, but there's just no way that it could compete with the scope of what Dick Tracy was. We knew when we read in the Hollywood Reporter that Warren Beatty was going to do Dick Tracy, and we didn't know we were going to get it. I remember we looked at each other and we said, whoever gets that is getting the statue,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of. But that was almost a culmination of it. I think that I did makeup for a couple more years after that, and it was just time to move on.
And you moved on and did a ton of work with the Star Wars franchise.
Actually,
the Star Trek franchise.
Yeah, nothing to do with Star Wars at all.
Yeah.
Star Trek. I was as a kid growing up, I talked about those special years like between 11 and 16, which is when I saw the original Star Trek. And I was a very literate kid. I read all the science fiction classics, by the time I was, 14 years old. And science fiction pretty much was mocked back then. It was really not for adults, to the mass market always considered it to be for, children, kids stuff. Now it's a whole different thing. Star Trek was one of the shows that laid that path out, that made it respectable, I had read all the classic science fiction. To me, science fiction was always respectable. But I remember bringing science fiction books to school in the 60s and being made fun of and stuff. It was not cool. They chase you with pitchforks and torches, if you were reading science fiction.
Now, did you do the makeup artistry as well as other visual design of Star Trek?
That's how I started on Star Trek. As soon as they were doing Next Generation, they were in the second season when we were doing Dick Tracy. And I had always been deeply involved with Trek. We had done magazines, and we even ran a store in Manhattan called the Federation Trading Post. It was just Star Trek stuff at 53rd and 3rd Avenue. I think back on that, like, how the hell did we ever do that? That is some prime real estate there. But once Dick Tracy was done, I went right over to see Mike Westmore, who was, I don't know if you ever heard of the Westmores of Hollywood. Those are makeup artists that practically invented Hollywood makeup. I mean,
Yeah, they're a family of artists, are they not?
There was a time.
Yeah, our son went to school with one of their grandsons at Chapman University, and that's how I first got aware of
What was his name? Do you know his name?
I don't know. I'd have to text him while we're talking. Let's see. You keep talking. I'll see if I can figure this out.
So anyway, I went over and met Mike Westmore, and actually even before that, I remember we were in the lab in Brooklyn, and I knew that they were doing Star Trek. It was just killing me, They hadn't even started shooting it yet. They were just writing the scripts. And my partner, Caglione, says, well, why don't you call Paramount and get Bob Justman on the phone? And I'm like, what are you, crazy? I can't. And I realized, well, why can't I? I'm a pro. So I got on the telephone. I called the Paramount switchboard. I said, in my most adult voice I could muster, yes, this is Doug Drexler calling. I'd like to speak to Bob Justman in the Star Trek office. And they said, one moment, and they put me through just like that. And before you knew it, I had Bob Justman on the phone. Now, Bob Justman was like a hero to me as a kid growing up. He was one of the producers on the original show with Gene Roddenberry. And as a kid, I had read The Making of Star Trek. It was just chock full of production memos written by this guy, Bob Justman, who I loved like an uncle and had never met. And so I had been approaching the show at, on a friendship level with Bob, and I had visited a couple of times. But me coming out on Dick Tracy and making friends with Mike Westmore, that was just, he hired me right away. I begged him to come let me work on Star Trek. And he was like, well, what do you want to do that for? You're doing big movies and blah, blah. And I'm like, no, man, you don't understand. I have to work on Star Trek. It's in my DNA. And he hired me. And so I did makeup with Mike, for Mike, on Star Trek, loving every freaking second of it on Next Generation for 3 years. I got to know the cast quite well, and they really were very spirited cast and a lot of fun to be around. And I just had a blast living on those sets. I mean, I lived on the Enterprise, and the sets are spectacular. I mean,
and you had a big hand at designing all those. In fact, I just did get the text back from my son. It was his great-grandson, Alex. Alex Westmore. I don't know if you know that person or not.
There's a lot of Westmores, let me tell you. I mean, almost every show has a Westmore.
Hey, Doug, when we come back, we want to take a break right now for a story or two from one of our fantastic sponsors. But what I would like to do when we come back is, I know you had a big hand at the designing of the Klingons, look and feel and their spaceship and whatever. If you could take us through that process and what us business folk can take away from what you learn about visual storytelling and just the little nuances that go into creating that Klingon persona and that Klingon workship and the power that has on our subconscious. So if we can, let's cover that here in just a moment. We'll be right back with Doug Drexler on Business of Story. Hey, if you like what you're hearing here on Business of Story, then you are going to love Definitive, the email from Convince and Convert that many marketers say is the most useful resource around. Each day, the team at Convince and Convert picks a topic and sends you the 3 best resources ever created about that topic. It's topical, it's timely, it's useful, so go to definitivedigest.com and subscribe for free right now. To tell effective business stories means to truly understand your audience, beckon them in with a story they care about, convert them into a customer, and then nurture that relationship for lifelong brand bonding. That's not always easy to do, but marketing automation has made it easier than ever. The challenge is, how do you take all that data and turn it into drama? Well, the marketing gods over at Oracle Marketing Cloud have done that for us. They've created this easy-to-read and easy-to-digest guide called Marketing Automation Simplified Guide. It offers an introduction to the 5 tenets of modern marketing and breaks down the tips marketers need to know to automate and optimize. This includes data in targeting, email marketing, lead nurturing, lead scoring, content marketing, and sales enablement. So to get your free Oracle Marketing Cloud Guide, Marketing Automation Simplified, go to bit.ly/Oracle Automation. That's bit.ly/Oracle Automation, and start getting your brand story straight. Hey, I've got a question for you. What's the best call to action button color on your website? Yeah, you probably didn't see that one coming, did you? Well, what's the best shape and sizes of your CTA buttons? And what copy gets more clicks? You know, these questions have interrupted my sleep patterns for weeks now, until I downloaded a helpful new email marketing guide from Emma called Why We Click: The Psychology Behind a Great Call to Action. You'll learn how applying just a little bit of brain science can transform your CTA buttons into small but mighty conversion powerhouses. It covers the button color, copy, and placement that helps skyrocket click rates. Check it out at myemma.com/click. You know, Emma helps marketers everywhere send smart, stylish email newsletters, promotions, and automated campaigns, and help us all rest a little easier knowing our email marketing is doing its job. So check out their new publication at myemma.com/click. Welcome back to Business of Story, and our wonderful guest today, Doug Drexler, Academy Award-winning makeup artist for Dick Tracy. Also won several Emmys, as I understand, for your work on Star Trek, or is it Battlestar Galactica? But you had a big hand at working with the Klingons. I suppose they're look and feel for their makeup as well as their ship. So what can we learn from you, the Klingon creator for Star Trek and some of these movies, that we could apply in our own business world?
Let's just say I was an enabler. I didn't create the Klingons, and I didn't create their look. I did makeup. I did makeup on Klingons on the Next Generation, which was always fun. And when you're painting a face, especially a face like a Klingon face, you're pushing it larger than life. It's a little bit operatic. You bring out the bone structure of a person's face in different ways. You can make them more sympathetic. You can make them scarier. You can make them look not well. So you're telling a story about someone through their face. And on a show like Star Trek, where everything is a turn of the screw into larger than life, you have a freer hand to do that, and especially with the Klingons. If you have a really, like I did a makeup on a Klingon who was a Klingon leader, and his name was Kempek, and he had to look like the biggest demon of all of them. So I did sculpt his forehead for that, and I did go out of my way to make him look more aggressive, like an alpha male. In most cases, if you were just doing a person on the street, or for instance, if you were doing Jack Palance as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where it's closer to a human form, and you want him to be able to intermingle with human beings without them running and screaming, you're going to do an aggressive face that's subliminal, more like a satyr almost, which is, I know what Dick Smith did with that makeup. He pushed Palance towards a satyr. When you're doing a Klingon, you could go bigger and broader, and you should never be afraid to do the makeup with a lot of confidence in the application and the line and the way you bring out the bone structure in their face. So you're telling a story there. And I suppose it's the same with anything. It would be the same with business. When you're communicating with in a business meeting, yes, you want to get the facts across, but at the same time, you want to manipulate the feelings that the people who are watching are either having a feeling of dread or they're feeling warm and fuzzy. And that's for you to figure out how to do that. Yeah. But it's really the same exact thing. When you wear a story on your face, or you wear the story in the graphics or the PowerPoint. I mean, I did graphics on Star Trek for years, which would be a lot like a presentation that you're talking about. We used to do, monitor graphics, main viewing screen graphics, graphics that gave data but still had to be understood, but not look too much. The thing is, you got to get your ideas across without looking too Fisher Price. You know what I mean? Where it doesn't look like it's made for the, still has to show a certain amount of respect to the intelligence of the person who's watching it, but get the information across immediately.
And the bane of our existence is everything you're just talking about right there is stock photography, because so much of it is so vanilla. It's like putting a little bit of mayo, if you will, on a bologna sandwich. It gives you a little flavor, but it's pretty bland. And we all get, we're struck with budgets, and clients don't want to spend the money on doing proper photography or imagery. But it can really impact the power of a story when you're just putting milquetoast stock imagery up there as kind of a lazy way to get a message across.
Yeah, I suppose it's a lot like showing a documentary on something, knowing how to get that information across and keep it, charming or funny, or makes people see it in a way that relates to their everyday life. That's the trick. It's learning how to ring those psychological bells, that makes Pavlov's dog salivate.
And it's very subliminal, isn't it? The look and feel that you put on there, it's not for the conscious mind to absorb and digest. It's really for the subconscious mind, the dark reaches of our mind going, oh, crap, what's that? Or, ooh, spooky Klingon just entered the room,
You could change a person's face in very subtle ways that create very strong feelings, for instance, Linda Blair in The Exorcist. I always go back to Dick Smith, but if you look at Linda Blair, he gave her, a little more of a knitted brow, and he got rid of her eyebrows, and immediately that's evil there. The shape of the skull comes through more. If you want someone to give us a feeling of dread about them, then you might want to bring out the features of their face that kind of show the skull that's underneath. You don't want to do it in such a way where it's like a skull instantly. It's a joke, But there are ways to do that if you're good at what you do and you've been practicing and you've looked at and observed the real thing. If you see someone that makes you have a feeling of dread, to look at and analyze what it is about that face that makes you feel that way. It's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
But
Doug, in our line of work with communications, we are just overwhelmed with messages. Basically, I was at a speaking engagement the other day, and I just put out to the crowd, that ADHD is now a communicable disease, and we're all the viruses. We're spreading this. And so it's really hard to get our attention through. And when you talk to content marketers, really good content marketers, you will hear it time and time again, as they always say, start with the visual. Know what you want to say, but before you write anything down, start with that visual and make sure that visual works to cut through this literal cacophony of communication. Would you agree with that?
Well, visual sound as well hits people instantly, but yeah, sure. We are visual creatures, and there's no doubt that that's what's going to get people's attention first. Of course, on the other hand, it depends on what your medium is. If you're working television, if someone gets up for a minute, you're going to rely on sound, to pull them back, to take a look at what's going on. Something's happened, If it was radio, it's going to be sound. If you're talking about a presentation where you have people in a room, I'd say probably more important than anything is the presenter, that they have an air of confidence. You have to have an utter air of confidence about you. Otherwise, you'll lose the audience. It doesn't matter how interesting what it is you're trying to communicate. If you come across as weak, they're not going to find what you're trying to sell. And when I say sell, it's the same for me as it is for someone in business. I'm trying to sell the idea of who somebody is by how they look, If I don't do the makeup with confidence, it doesn't work. It completely falls apart and becomes distracting. And it's the same if you're making like a PowerPoint presentation where there's a human presence up in front of everybody. That person has to come across as just the coolest person you can imagine, who's utterly confident. And that's the trick. You know, you could spend your whole life, and I've seen lots of people who spend their whole lives never learning to be confident in front of other people. I mean, I learned it as in the business once I got into, you know, the Hollywood thing, because very often we would have to do interviews or go up in front of people, you know, on stage and stuff like that. And after you've done it a few times, it just kind of becomes a natural thing. You know, you realize it's not the end of the world if you screw up.
And then what about the imagery, too? You mentioned that doing work with Star Trek, that you had to take these data screens and make them, you know, immediately readable in a very quick scene. But how can we apply that with the data that we need to turn into drama in the form of, you know, our PowerPoint presentations and slides?
You know, the one thing that I can teach you, a bit of wisdom I could impart from my experience working, and I think it applies to anything, whether it be a magazine cover, a book cover, you know, commercial on television, is whatever you do, and I'm sure your son will tell you this because I looked at his stuff and he's a pro, and I'm sure he'll tell you that when he does a design, that he squints at it or looks at it from across the room. And everything that we ever did, we always give everything the squint test, because whether I was a makeup artist, I would look at the makeup not directly at the person. I'd look at them through the mirror, because now they're twice as far from me. I want to see what they're going to look like from a distance, and then I squint my eyes a little bit, because when you squint your eyes, the basic image and the basic forms, they boil down to what is going to be left. Because you did the graphic, you know what it looks like. You have to remember that you know it a little too well. It's actually working against you to know it that well. What you've got to do is take off your glasses if you wear glasses, look at something, squint. If I still can't make out the basic forms, and that there's an asymmetry to it, and that it doesn't tire the eye to look at it, or maybe everything goes away. You look at it and all the stuff you're trying to show disappears. Now you know what you have to punch up, because you have to pretend that the final image you're going to look at is what it looks like when you squint your eyes and don't know what you're looking at. That's the most important thing.
The squint test. And, you know, I saw that in action last week when you and I were Skyping just to get acquainted before this interview, and you were looking over my shoulder on my video camera on Skype, and you saw a painting that our son had done, and it was clear across the room over my piano, my Yamaha piano in my room. And you said, "What's that?" And I said, "What's what?" And you said, "That piece of art hanging on the wall behind you." And nobody, number one, has ever asked me about that on a Skype session. Let alone then I looked at it from your standpoint, and I thought that was so small over my shoulder, and yet it caught your eye. So that's exactly what you're talking about, that squint test.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I have to admit that I am very visually oriented, and I'm always looking for patterns and shapes, even when I'm not, you know. So I'm not surprised you say I'm one of the first visual artists you've had on the show. So I imagine the more visual people you have on the show, they'll see that. There are a lot of people who actually, and this is not a criticism, but it depends on how your brain is made up. I mean, you could go through life looking, but not really seeing, you know. And when I became an artist, and I spent years drawing and sketching and sculpting and stuff like that, is what you're doing is learning to actually see what you're looking at. There's a difference between seeing and looking. You know, looking is, you're not, it just breezes by you when you're just looking, but actually seeing it, that's a whole different thing, and it takes some learning. I mean, for instance, I do visual effects now, and we do spaceships and stuff, and we did Battlestar Galactica and things like that. I find that people who worked strictly, and I'm not saying that you need this background, but it does help. People who've only worked on the computer and have never spent any time drawing or sculpting don't really understand what something looks like. They've only been looking at things. They've never really been seeing them. I think that people who got into the computer-generated imagery thing, like myself, after years of drawing and sculpting, or, you know, my partner, Gary, who used to shoot spaceships physically, he knows how light really moves and reacts on the surface. So if you have an understanding in real life, when you go to the CG, you're going to bring that with you. It's like I said earlier, one thing informs the other. And I would tell anybody who wants to create images, even if you're just maybe doing PowerPoint stuff, it might be a good thing. If you have to design graphics for a PowerPoint presentation, it wouldn't hurt you to pick up a pencil and just sketch the room once in a while, and just try. It doesn't matter if it doesn't look good.
I was going to say, even a crappy illustrator like me, it's okay to
yes.
sit down and
yes.
Okay.
When we are children, and I've looked at lots of kids' drawings, every child has a natural sense of composition. It's always there. It never fails. And then, as they start to get older and dealing with other people, I hate to say this, but there are a lot of stinking people out there who can't stand to see you succeed at anything. Even if you're a little kid doing a drawing, it'll make some other little kid feel, like less of a person. We're all trying to figure out who we are and what kind of person we are, if we are somebody. And there are plenty of people out there, and I mean, anybody who picks up a pencil and draws, you're going to take a lot from people. People are going to tell you it's no good, it doesn't look any good. These kids who go from being children, who have a natural sense of composition, go from that to not being able to draw anything anymore, or we'll just tell you, I can't draw, I'm no good. You know what? Drawing teaches you something. It doesn't matter what it comes out looking like. And that also, when I say if you're going to do a PowerPoint presentation, it's a good idea to go up there and feel comfortable. It's the same with drawing. If you're going to draw, be confident. It doesn't matter whether you think you know how to draw or not. It's the act of drawing that you're going to get something from. And part of that is learning to be confident. It's one of the hardest things. Some people, actually, although I tell you, I've met people who just have a natural confidence right off the bat. There's some people who just have it already. But it's something that everyone needs to succeed, I think, whether they're doing business or doing art for a TV show or doing makeup or anything, Ta-da!
That's good stuff. Doug, I really appreciate you being on the show. It's fascinating to me how you approach your craft. And you were telling me, too, that you're not doing as much makeup artistry now, but you're doing more motion work and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I really haven't done makeup. Oh, it's been over 20 years since I last did makeup. I ended up,
Gosh, is Dick Tracy that old? I can't believe I'm that old.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did makeup Star Trek for like 3 years after Dick Tracy. Uh-huh. And that just got me excited about everything else. I mean, I spent all that time on the sets, so impressed with the sets. I was a sketcher from way back. I just had to be in the art department. And if you're on a show that goes that people are on for a while together, you can actually move sideways on the show. I ended up going to the art department where I did graphics and scenic, and then I slid sideways over to visual effects, and then slid sideways again to do illustration for the show. But anyway, it's been. Hey, never be. You know what? Most makeup artists that I started off with are still makeup artists. Most people stay whatever it is that they are for like 40 years, 45 years sometimes. I can't. I just don't. I can't do that. There's too many interesting things. I only wish. I hear people who say that they're bored. Are you kidding me? I only wish I had a few more lifetimes, because there's a bunch of stuff I still have to do.
And like you said earlier, it takes confidence and the courage to be able to go ahead and do that. But to follow your bliss, as Joseph Campbell says, one pivot is a natural next pivot into what you've been doing. It's all been about visual storytelling, and I can't thank you enough for being on Business of Story today. I know you've got to get back to the set here, and so in addition to what you've told us, having that utter confidence in front of an audience. The squint test, I love that. I'm going to actually start using it. What's it look like from, the distance? The difference between seeing and looking. And is there any one last tidbit you can give us before we sign off today on what us business storytellers can learn from your expertise in visual storytelling?
If someone knocks on the door, and the door opens, and there's a guy there with sharp pointed teeth, and he's got a cape, that's Dracula. You should run away. That's the best thing, one of the best things I could probably warn you about.
to run away from the bloodsuckers. That would be mostly MBAs, right? I'm sorry about that.
Well, you asked me, so.
Well, Doug, I can't thank you enough. It's just been a pleasure having you here, and it's so much fun for us to do a little bit of a dive into Hollywood and what's happening behind the scenes. I just love it. It's a big passion of mine, and I thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening to this edition of Business of Story. If you like what you're hearing, please go to iTunes and let the world know by giving us a star rating up top and leaving us a comment. Really appreciate it. We've been rolling along that level. We're getting several a week now, and we would love to have you join that process. Also, if you want to continue to reignite the one true superpower that we all possess, that power of storytelling, and like Doug said earlier, it tends to get quieted within us, back in kindergarten when we were at the tops of our game, but our society has a tendency of silencing that inner raconteur. Well, I've got a utility belt, and I would love to have Doug actually design me a utility belt of storytelling tools, but you can find them at businessofstory.com. I have a brand new workbook there that you can download. It's a DIY brand story strategy workbook that allows you to take this universal structure of storytelling, the same types of storytelling work and structure that Hollywood knows, that you can use to apply to your business to craft and tell compelling stories that sell. So visit me over at businessofstory.com, and if you have an idea for a guest or a topic, please send me a note at park@businessofstory.com. And until next Monday, when we'll release another wonderful episode with a fantastic story artist from around the world like Doug, have a wonderful life.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business of Story. Don't forget there are terrific free storytelling resources for you at thebusinessofstory.com, where you'll also find the complete show archive. The Business of Story is sponsored by Oracle Marketing Cloud, Emma, and by Convince and Convert, and is produced by Convince and Convert Media. Find more great shows like The Business of Story at marketingpodcasts.com, the first search engine for marketing podcasts. Podcast imaging by AudioBag.com.